Hello everybody, how's it going? Ben Gothard here, founder of Project Egg, and today we are talking to Ivan Misner from Pennsylvania. How you doing today, Ivan?
I'm doing fantastic, Ben. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really do appreciate your time. So let's get started. First question I have for you today, Ivan, is what is your story?
Oh, what's my story? Well, I've got a lot of gray hair, so it's a long story. I'll make it real short. I'm the founder of an organization called BNI, Business Network International. I started it 33 years ago. I was 28 years old. And we now have 8,300 groups in 73 countries around the world. We help people build each other's business through referrals and through word of mouth. I started it, like I said, 33 years ago when I was looking for referrals for my consulting practice. And I wanted to surround myself with people who would be willing to refer me. I was willing to do the same. And what I discovered was that we don't teach this in colleges and universities anywhere in the world. And so people are hungry for networking. They were hungry for building their business through referrals, but they had no idea how to do it. And so we kind of learned as we went.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. So I want to dig into your story a little bit more. You said you had a lot of gray hair, so you have a long story. Well, I really want to hear the long version of it. So could you start from the very beginning and really share with us, your childhood and where you came from and how you really came to develop that whole organization?
So I was born in Pittsburgh, but I left there when I was 6 years old. My family moved to the Los Angeles area, and my dad didn't really know Los Angeles, and we moved to South Central LA. So I lived in South Central for about a year. South Central is a pretty tough neighborhood. Lived there for about a year as a kid. And then we moved to Azusa, which is a couple of steps up. I grew up in the Azusa area, and went to high school and elementary school, high school there. Grew up in a very working class neighborhood, one income family. So not very wealthy, not wealthy at all. And I was accepted to Occidental College with a 50% scholarship, but I couldn't afford the other 50%. And so I had to turn down the scholarship and went to junior college. Did junior college, and then I did state college. And when I was done with I did Cal Poly Pomona, is where I got my bachelor's degree. And then I went into debt heavily and did my master's and doctoral at USC. I had some scholarships there. Got my master's and doctorate. Went out into the world when I got my master's and started working for companies, and really decided that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I didn't want to work for people. I had a bad experience working I was the general manager for a light manufacturing plant, and one of the owners was an idiot, and so I just said, there isn't enough working for somebody else. So I went out on my own as a consultant. And it was in that role that I found that referrals were the best way for me to get business. And I just was never taught how to generate referrals. And that's really what led me to start BNI. When I started BNI, I'd like to tell you I had this vision of an international organization with chapters all over the world. But the truth is, I just wanted some referrals and I wanted to help my friends. But someone came to that first group, because we only take one person per professional category in a chapter, and she couldn't join, so she asked me if I would help her open up a second group. And I actually said no to her. I said, no, this isn't what I do. I'm a management consultant. And she said, well, this is kind of consulting. You're helping me build my business. That's a stretch, but okay. So I helped her open up the second chapter, and we had about 24 people come to the first meeting of the second chapter. 2 couldn't join because of a conflict. Their profession was already represented. And both of them said, this is great. Would you help me open up my own group because I can't join? And I said, no, this isn't what I do. I'm a business. And they talked me into it. And after a year, we had 20 groups, really by accident. And it was at that point that I realized that I had struck a chord in the business community that I didn't anticipate. I didn't see it coming. And once I realized that I had struck this chord in the business community, I sat down and did a business plan. I put my consulting to work, and I did a business plan for how could I scale this business into a national organization. Now we're international. We have chapters in 73 countries all around the world.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So when you were growing up, you said that you lived in a working class home. How did that affect your mindset and your mentality growing up? And how does that affect you now, today, in your entrepreneurial career?
So my parents were not very entrepreneurial, but they were great parents. I grew up in a really good family. If I have any people skills at all, I got them from my mother. She, I don't know if you've ever heard the 3-foot rule. Anybody who's within 3 foot, you start a conversation with. That was my mother, except she had like the 30-foot rule. If they were in the same room, you're gonna have a conversation with them. So my mom had just mad people skills, and my dad had no people skills. he was not a people person, but my dad had an incredible work ethic, just an amazing work ethic. He was the hardest working man I knew, and at one point he had 3 jobs because my mom couldn't work. She had health issues, and so my dad had 3 jobs to help raise this family, but he always made time. I don't know how he did it, but he made time for the family. And so, I certainly learned a work ethic and a family ethic from my dad, and I learned people skills and a family ethic from my mother. So great family. I don't have one of those childhoods that was horribly traumatized by family. I mean, I have the trauma that any kid has, but I had a good family.
Fantastic. So when you were going through college, had entrepreneurship ever even dawned on you at that time, or was it more, I want to go to school, get good grades, and get a good job? Was it more of that formal route that you were pursuing?
Well, I had decided I was going to go to law school, which I'll tell you about in a moment. But as a young boy, I actually started a couple of businesses. I had a candy business where I was selling candy. That's a weird story. And I actually had a pretty good business of selling reflective numbers for houses. I had a neighbor who was producing this stuff made out of resin with reflective material. And I said, this is awesome. Where are you selling it? And he said, I'm not really. I'm just, giving it to friends and family. I'm like, would you make some for me? I could sell these. And so I went door to door, knocking on doors and selling these reflective numbers. They sold so well. I went back to him and I said, I need a huge batch. And he said, okay. And so he made a huge batch. And I actually hired 2 or 3 guys. I think it was 2 guys I hired. And there was 3 of us, and we were out there selling like crazy, and we were making good money. I was probably, 13 years old, 14 years old, and making pretty good money for 13, 14-year-old. And I went to the guy's house like the 5th or 6th time to pick up stuff, and he said, this is the last batch. And I'm like, why? He said, because this is too much work. You're selling all of this, and this was just like a hobby for me, and now it's like a business. I'm like, well, that's great, isn't it? No, it's too much work. So I lost my supplier, and that was my first failed business because I lost my supplier. So I kind of had an entrepreneurial spirit, but I had decided I was going to go to law school. And so everything I did in college was really to get me to law school up until my master's degree. When I finished my bachelor's degree, I applied to law school. I was accepted to law school. And for some reason, Ben, I can't really put my finger on it, but for some reason I decided I don't think I really want to be a lawyer anymore. I mean, that was my dream when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, but that's not my dream at 21. And so I didn't go to law school, even though I'd have been accepted. And I went to management school instead. My focus was on organizational behavior.
Wow.
I think that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were to now give advice to somebody else who is deciding whether or not to go the formal education route, or maybe they're having some entrepreneurial thoughts and maybe they want to pursue that route as well. What advice would you give to that individual who's trying to make that decision right now?
Well, look, I'm a believer in education. I really am. But, you're talking to somebody with 10 years of college. So I don't think you need 10 years of college to be an entrepreneur. No question about it. But I'm a fan of education. I can almost always tell whether someone has a college education pretty quickly who's working for me. Even though I may not have hired them, I could tell whether they were college educated. And here's how. Generally, and there in my lifetime, there have been a few exceptions, but I could count all of the exceptions on one hand. When you're dealing with a college-educated individual as an employer, and you give them a task, let's start with someone without college. If you give them a task and you don't give them the details of how to do it, they're like, what do I do? You haven't given me any instructions. I don't know how to do this. I've never done anything like this before.
Yeah.
And they don't know how to solve problems as easily. Mm-hmm. You give this to a college-educated person with the same instructions, they'll go, okay, and they'll go off. And you tell them, if you get stuck, come see me, and they're off because mm-hmm. they're used to taking on projects. They're used to being given something and told to do it, and I have found my experiences, they're much better at being able to run with it.
Yeah.
Now, there are some exceptions to that rule, but they are the exceptions. So I'm a fan of education. Now, having said that, here's what I say, because as a professor, I taught for 16 years, taught at the same university I got my bachelor's degree at. Mm-hmm. And kids would come up to me, kids, early 20s, and they'd say, Dr. Misner, what do you think what business should I go into? What should I do? Should I start my own? Many of them wanted to start their own business. What should I do? And I would always ask them, what do you love to do? And they would inevitably say, that's not my question. My question is, what business should I go into? What's the latest, greatest? What's the thing I should be focusing on? And I would inevitably say to them, okay, but what do you love to do? And they wouldn't get it. As a matter of fact, I had one young man say to me, you're not listening to me. And I'm like, no, I'm listening to you very well. You're not listening to me. What do you love to do? And he said, why? I said, because if I tell you making these paperweights is the latest, greatest business to go in, and you hate manufacturing, I'm giving you bad advice. I need to know, what do you love to do? And if I have a sense of what you love to do, then I can help give you some direction on you finding that. Because if you're not passionate about what you do, you will never, ever be incredibly successful at it. You've got to be crazy passionate about what you do in order to achieve and maintain success. So that's what I generally tell young people when they ask me the question.
I think that's a really interesting perspective on it, that you've had both sides, the college education and the entrepreneurial side. I think that's a really interesting perspective. So once you left college and you are now a Ph.D., what was that transition like for you going from the world of formal education into the working world? And how did that shift look like for you?
Well, listen, I worked for several companies before I started my own business. They were great training grounds. My first management position was as a field operations manager for the U.S. Census Bureau in 1980, where I wasn't an independent contractor. I was a W-2 employee for the Bureau, the Census Bureau, and it was amazing. I was 23 years old and I supervised 500 people. I probably hired and fired more people in 1 year than I did for the next 30 years combined. And it was an amazing experience. It really was. So I had the education. Now I needed the work experience. This was a great place to get working experience. And then the next place that I went to was also a great place to get work experience. I worked for a transportation company in Los Angeles. and they had some financial difficulties, and so I really learned how to deal with some financial issues in running a business. And so the owner, or the boss, the president, kept giving me more tasks because they had some challenges. He fired somebody one day and he said to me, "What do you know about marketing?" I was an assistant to the president, which was an executive level position, but had no staff. I was staffing him. And he said, "Well, what do you know about marketing?" I said, I don't know anything about marketing. I had no classes in marketing, which is funny now because I now run the world's largest word-of-mouth marketing company. But at the time, I had no courses on marketing. He said, "Well, start reading some books because I'm making you the manager of marketing services, the interim manager of marketing services this morning at 10 o'clock. I'm firing the guy. So you're going to be the interim manager of marketing services." And he did that with like 2 or 3 other positions. So it was such a great training ground for me to learn not only how to manage people, but to learn. At one point he said, "What do you know about purchasing?" And I said, "I know less about purchasing than I did about marketing." He said, "Well, read up, because in an hour you're going to be the interim purchasing agent." I'm like, "Oh my God, I don't know anything about that." So it was fantastic. But after I left that company, I went to work for a company that the owner was a moron. I mean, just and horrible to work with. Absolutely one of the worst people I've ever worked for in my entire life. And I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to run my own business. And that's when I decided to do the consulting business, which I launched out in 1983, full time.
So when you were taking the steps to launch that new venture, what were those actionable things that you actually did? Because a lot of people say, "Oh, I went and started a business and then I had these 10 clients and I was doing millions of dollars." But to actually get off the ground, what steps did you take?
Yeah, so the first thing I did was I had been consulting part-time for a number of years, really. But when I decided to do it full-time, I landed one big client. So before I quit my day job, I landed one really big client that would pay me about maybe half to 2/3 of what I was making as a salary. So I had time to make up more money. But I'll tell you where I think I can answer your question best was when I started BNI, and I decided I wanted to scale BNI. One of the first things I did that I think was really, in retrospect, very important was I created an organization chart of 15 different positions. Now, at the time, it was me and one part-time assistant and one part-time person helping me do some BNI stuff. She made packets for BNI, new member packets. That was it. So I had the equivalent of one employee and me. But I created an organization chart with 15 different boxes, 15 different positions. And what I did was I took the positions that one person equivalent did, which was about 3 different roles. And I took the other 12, and what I did was I put their name in the boxes where they were doing things, and I put my name in the boxes where I was doing things. So, it's Ivan Misner, founder, president, Ivan Misner, director of marketing, Ivan Misner, complaint department, Ivan Misner, janitor. And my goal was for the next 5 to 10 years, max, to get my name out of all the boxes, except one. I just wanted to be in one box. And so everything I did was strive to scale the business to the point where I would just be in one box. And it took a little over 5 years to get there. And I got there, but here's what I learned. Once I got there, I realized there were boxes I hadn't thought of when I wrote that. And so I was still in more than one box, but I was out of 14 other boxes because I had other people doing those roles. And I think that was very helpful to me to create a vision of where I wanted to go and how I wanted to get there and when I wanted to get there. So, but here's one other thing I would add. If you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to scale your business, you're going to go through rough times. People look at my company and they think, wow, he's so lucky. Let me tell you something. I almost went bankrupt a couple of times. I took loans out on my house twice. At one point, I had 6 weeks of paychecks for me on my desk. This was before automatic, deposits. And so I would write checks out. I paid my suppliers, I paid my employees, but if I cashed my own check, it would bounce. And so I had 6 weeks of paychecks to me sitting on my desk that I couldn't cash. I couldn't deposit because there wasn't enough money. So you just got to work through those difficult times. You got to learn how to work through those difficult times. You got to have a plan. You got to have a strategy. And I also think you need good advice. You need to surround yourself with good people, good coaches, good consultants, good advisors to help you get through tough times.
So when you were saying that you only wanted to be in one box,
yeah,
what box was that, and how did you decide that that was the one box that you wanted to fill?
Well, I wanted to be the CEO, and I wanted to do the role of a CEO. I didn't want to have to do other positions. I mean, there were many years, even after the 15 box thing, where I was doing a couple of different boxes. For example, here's one. I used to actually, in my Outlook, I had a category in my Outlook, my to-do, that was it was there for years. And I would list things in there that I would do around the office. And the category was things I should not be doing anymore. And so if there was something that came up, and like updating, now we're going back 20 years, but the company's 10, 15 years old. I'm walking around updating the virus software on all the computers because we didn't have an IT guy. And I was the closest thing to an IT guy because I knew how to do it. And a lot of my employees didn't know how to do it. So I'm updating all the software. I'm updating, the different word processing programs and whatnot. I'm troubleshooting computer problems. So every time I did that, I would put a little hash mark on it. So did it again, did it again, did it again. When I had enough hash marks, it was like, okay, it's time for me to hire somebody to do this. And then I would scratch it off, but there were still other things. I just wanted to be CEO. So I got to that point where, I tell people I'm a 20-year overnight success. It took me, damn near 20 years to really be at the level that I wanted to be, to mostly be working on one box. But here's the thing. At some point, 20 years is a long time. I did it for almost 30 years, and it gets old. An entrepreneur, in my opinion, has got to be working in their flame or working in their wax. When they're working in their flame, they're on fire. They love what they're doing. They're passionate about it. You can hear it in their voice. You can see it in the way they talk. When they're working in their wax, it takes all their energy away. You can hear that in their voice. You can see it in the way they talk. And so for many years, my flame was building a company with thousands of locations, dealing with all the legal, dealing with all the accounting issues. I was passionate about that. After 30 years, that got old. And so it eventually became my wax. And so I think at some point in a company, it's very important to reinvent yourself. If you're going to stay in the business, what happens many times is entrepreneurs then sell their business because it's not fun anymore. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to sell my business. I loved my business. I just didn't love what I was doing in my business after 30 years. And so I brought in partners to do the stuff that was my wax. And I focus on what's my flame. And what's my flame is this: doing interviews, writing books, dealing with the media. These are the things that are my flame now. So over time, those boxes change. So even when I achieved it, I was just in one. At some point, even that one, no longer, it became my wax. So you got to be able to reinvent yourself over time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And so when you are growing and you're building out that organization and that business, when you're looking to hire somebody, how do you know when is the right time? Because you're going to have your expenses, you're going to have your income, and it may not seem feasible to be able to bring in other people to help.
Yeah. It's way different today than it was, 33 years ago. Today, we've got budgets, we've got plans. We know what we can afford based on the revenue stream. We're pretty confident what we can afford the following year, and then we hire those positions as time goes on. But when I started, it was different. And I think that's really what the heart of your question is. When you're small, how do you know to hire? Isn't that your question?
Yes.
Yeah. So for me, there had to be two things. One was I had to show that I had a need, and that's why I did that things I shouldn't be doing anymore, and the boxes and the things I shouldn't be doing anymore. And then I needed to see the cash flow. If I hired this person, could I afford to pay for it? One of the things I was pretty good at doing was hiring people part-time and telling them, if you do a good job and we continue to grow, if you're interested in a full-time job, that opportunity exists. I didn't promise it to them, but that opportunity exists. I hired many people part-time that I then flipped to full-time after they worked there for 6 months or a year, and I knew I could do it. I also hired a lot of independent contractors. So, I mean, I had somebody do my bookkeeping who didn't work for me. They were an independent contractor for a long time before I hired a full-time bookkeeper. So you got to use independent contractors because you have a lot less expenses until the business becomes so big that it's now cheaper to hire somebody and have them in-house than it is to use the outside person. And then you change. It's just shifting weight. And the center of gravity moves a little bit. So instead of it being an outside person, you bring that inside. It was the same with IT. I hired somebody outside at first, and they were an independent contractor. They even came in twice a week. So they came into my office, but they were an independent contractor that came in. Now we have several full-time in-house people. So my advice is transition gradually. It's when people start overspending. I need an IT person, I'm going to hire one. I need an accountant, I'm going to hire one. And now they're spending more money than they're bringing in. I was always very cautious about how I spent money.
So you mentioned being very meticulous about knowing where your money's coming in from. Well, when you first started your organization, how did you go about monetizing it? I mean, it seems like you figured out, okay, there's this need in the market, people want to be a part of these groups, but how did you take that idea and flesh it out into a monetizable business?
Well, I started it as part of my consulting business, so it was monetizable from the beginning. Last year, our organization passed 9.1 million referrals. And those 9.1 million referrals resulted in business for our members of $13.1 billion. That's billion with a B, $13.1 billion worth of business for our members all around the world. Now, just so you know, Ben, $13.1 billion is the same as the gross domestic product for the country of Liechtenstein. Okay, it's a small country, I know, but still, how cool is that we could generate as much business as a small nation in the world? So I knew from the beginning that the value that we would be adding to people exceeded the costs that they would be paying for the service. And it does. The key is you want to be successful in business, even from an early day, you got to know your numbers. And I say this to people, and it's like a bobblehead doll. It's like, yeah, I know my number. No. You really have to know your numbers. For example, I could tell you that as of this morning, BNI has 8,318 chapters with 230,293 members worldwide. As of this morning, I get a daily report on how many members we have and how many chapters we have. So you've got to know you got to make it granular. Don't just know your monthly numbers, know your weekly numbers. When you have a team that can be there to support you, know your numbers daily. But at the very least, know your numbers weekly. And most people, they couldn't tell you what their gross revenues were. They couldn't tell you how many clients they had exactly. They don't know their numbers. They're winging it in business, and that's why they fail. It used to surprise me that 50% of all businesses failed within 3 to 5 years. Now I'm surprised that 50% of businesses make it that long because they just don't know their numbers. Well, look, QuickBooks is a thing of wonder. When I started my businesses many, many years ago, you didn't have something like QuickBooks. I did it on what was called I think it was called a one sheet. It was a spreadsheet where you write checks and then you flip it over and you put it in the category. So it looked visually like an Excel spreadsheet, but it was all manual. So, back then, my first couple of years, I didn't know my numbers even weekly, but I knew them monthly because I would tally up the month of checks that I wrote. And I knew on a weekly basis the revenues. I knew the checks on a monthly basis. And that wasn't enough. As soon as I could go to something like QuickBooks, I did. I would urge business people to get on it, even if you're doing it yourself, learn QuickBooks so that you can have a handle on your financials. My biggest focus right now is I'm basically the Colonel Sanders of BNI. I'm the spokesperson for the organization. I represent the brand. I do interviews like this. This is what I do full time. And here's a technique that I use to help determine how I was shifting over time. I've used this for many, many years. My outlook is color coded. And I color code based on the things that I have to do versus the things I want to do, the things that I feel I really should be spending my time on. And the things that and it's changed over the years. Remember, I went from CEO to really the brand builder. I'm no longer the CEO of the company. My title is a founder and chief visionary officer, which is a strategic brand building position. So, but over the years, it's always been various shades of green. So Outlook has multiple shades of green. So whenever I was doing things that were the things I should be doing, it was in some shade of green. If I had to do administrative phone calls or face-to-face meetings on some administrative thing, it was in blue or some shade of blue or yellow or other colors. Red is bad, very bad. Red was stuff I didn't want to do, but I had to do. And, and sometimes you got to do what you got to do to get to do what you want to do. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do to get to do what you want to do. So the red came with the territory. Now, to the point now where I'm spending all my time pretty much in the green, to the point where my wife, this is my home office in Austin, Texas. My BNI's office is in Charlotte. But before I come down here to my office, my wife always asks me, she says, are you going to have a green day today? She knows that when I have a green day, it's all doing stuff that I'm passionate about. By the way, I have a green day today. This is one segment in the green day. Made it in the green. Sure. So the future for me is really doing what I'm passionate about. I think I don't plan on retiring anytime soon because I love what I do. And so somebody looking at it would go, yeah, you're working hard. I have people who think that they think I'm retired. One of our BNI franchises, like they think, Ivan's semi-retired because he's no longer the CEO. But she came here and spent some time with my wife and I. And my wife said to me, she said, my goodness, Ivan, he works a lot. And she's like, yeah, he still works full time. People are like, well, aren't you part-time? Yeah, I'm part-time. I now work 40 hours a week. You know, when I was running the company, I was working 60 or 70 hours a week. So I love what I'm doing. I'm passionate about it. I want to do more of this. I want to write more books. I got a couple of great books in me that I haven't. One I've finished, it hasn't been published, and one I'm working on. So that's my future, doing more of what I'm doing right here. That's the first question. What's your second? Yes. So that's a great question. Yeah, I think. Look, I think that I may walk into a room. I may not be the smartest guy in a room. May not be the most talented guy in a room, but I am almost always the most persistent guy in a room. And I think one of the reasons for my success is that I truly believe, and I have practiced this pretty well, that if you want to be successful in business, you have to do 6 things 1,000 times, not 1,000 things 6 times. Let me repeat that. If you want to be successful in business, I believe you got to do 6 things 1,000 times, not 1,000 things 6 times. So what happens with a lot of businesses is that they're looking for the bright shiny object, right? Oh, look at that. Oh, let's try that. This sounds interesting. Let's try that marketing approach, or let's try this marketing approach. And so they're constantly chasing bright shiny objects instead of having a plan. And you get that plan by having good advisors, by having good mentors. You can even have, they don't even have to be people you know. They can be virtual mentors. They can be shows like this where you learn. Lifelong learning is so important. So you learn, what are the 6 things? And by the way, it doesn't have to be 6. It could be 5. It could be 7. But you do a handful of things and you do it over and over and over and over and over again. So you figure out what you need to do. You base it on good advice you get. And then you're a dog with a bone. And you do it over and over and over again until you beat it into submission and you achieve what you want to achieve. I think that's one of the things that I've been pretty good at, and one of the reasons why I'm become pretty successful in life.